Ukraine peace talks or war escalation. The leaders of Germany and Ukraine have signed an agreement to develop long-range missiles. This development follows a significant Russian drone assault on citizens of Kyiv, prompting President Trump to label Vladimir Putin as crazy. Trump warns that the Russian president is playing with fire. What is likely to happen next? Joining us is Frank Gaffney, president of the Institute for the American Future and former Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. Frank, it's always a pleasure talking with you. So do you agree with President Trump? Is Putin playing with fire? If so, why?
I believe that President Putin is playing with fire in the sense that he is determined to continue to escalate this war until he achieves some kind of settlement on basically his terms. And I think he's doing so in part on the basis of President Trump's efforts to broker a settlement. And in the process, I think he has made a heroic effort to establish a basis with which he can deal with Putin. And I fear that Putin has mistaken that for a determination on the president's part to appease him, to essentially get him whatever he wants in order to stop the bloodshed. I don't think that is the president's view, and I think that what he's signaling now is that he is going to have to push back a bit on what Putin is doing and may yet have in mind doing. And the problem there is that there are indications, I think both in Belarus and in areas of Russia adjacent to Finland, that the Russians are now signaling a hostile attitude, shall we say, a willingness perhaps to engage in aggression against not just Ukraine, but against NATO nations as well.
Well, they've got they have a troop.
So sporty.
They have a troop buildup there, and Putin has some conditions also to end the war. Among them, he wants a commitment that NATO will not add new members. He wants sanctions against the country lifted. So, what do you think of those conditions? Are they reasonable, unreasonable?
Well, it's not so much what I think in terms of reasonable and unreasonable. I think it's what President Trump is going to deem acceptable. And I think he's already signaled that whether there are other members added to NATO elsewhere, I don't know where they would be, but that's a separate issue, that NATO will not include Ukraine. That's a going-in position, I believe, for President Trump. As to whether or not the other accommodations that Putin is seeking, territory in Ukraine, for example, and the removal of Vladimir Zelensky as the president there, and a neutralization, if you will, of Ukraine, which certainly sounds as though Putin intends to call the shots in the part of the country that he doesn't continue to occupy. Whether those will be acceptable to President Trump or not, I don't know. I think his desire to end the bloodletting, as I say, is profound. He's made that abundantly clear. But I also have the feeling that he's sensing that Putin is not actually all that interested in peace, either in Ukraine or possibly elsewhere. And that's going to require, I think, a different attitude on the part of the President of the United States.
Well, at the same time, German Chancellor Merz announced that some NATO countries are lifting range restrictions on some Western missiles provided to Ukraine. And those missiles can now strike deep inside Russia. Is this an escalation or an attempt to motivate Putin to get serious about peace?
Well, I think Putin will see it as an escalation for sure. And if those missiles are, in fact, used at ranges that they may be able to cover, maybe even to Moscow in some cases, that would almost certainly trigger a very violent response on Putin's part. And the violence has been pretty intense as it is. The question is, does this prompt him to act on what he has often threatened. He has a philosophy or a doctrine, if you will, with respect to nuclear weapons. And I'm talking about, what are called tactical nuclear weapons, presumably very low yield, but across that nuclear threshold. Might he retaliate by doing what he calls escalate to de-escalate? And I think there's a distinct possibility of that. He certainly is going to be threatening it, and if he threatens it, he may well decide he's going to act on it. So I'm hopeful that with this new authority, the Ukrainians will see the wisdom of not utilizing it. But, their backs are against the wall, and they feel, I think, in the negotiations to date, that their vital interests are not being adequately attended to by President Trump and by the Americans more generally. And that may cause them to do things that are rash, perhaps, and may, in fact, trigger that kind of escalation on Putin's part.
Okay, we're still a long way from ending this war. Frank Gaffney, president of the Institute for the American Future. Thank you, Frank, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
My privilege. Thank you.